Hi, everybody, and welcome to Powerful Stuff. Powerful Stuff is your one-stop shop for inner connection, allowing you to have deeper outer connection with the world and the people around you. And doing so by, not taking ourselves too seriously, taking our responsibilities seriously, but allowing ourselves to have playful curiosity around how we can grow and learn. I'm your host, Meredith Baker. I'm a leadership coach and founder of Powerful Stuff. And today's episode is one of the most important episodes, if not the most important episode I've ever done. I'm feeling this so deeply leading up to the election. I have on Shola Richards, who just wrote this book, Civil Unity, about helping us navigate really challenging conversations with our loved ones. And he shared with me before the episode, which I love, that his nickname is Brother Teresa, helping change the way we treat each other around the world. He's an incredible speaker and author. And we met in March at a Impact 11, which is like a speaker boot camp. And we instantly connected and gravitated. And I was thinking so deeply about this topic of, civil discourse leading up to the election, with some stuff that hits close to home, which I'll share to a degree about today. And Shola popped up on my feed about this book. And I was like, okay, that's the person I need to have on the pod. So I'm so glad that you're here. I can't tell you.
It's so funny because when we met back in March of this year, we connected instantly. I was like, I love your vibe. No idea you got a podcast, none. And we're just like, I just got to keep in touch. We got to keep this conversation going. And here we are, sharing space in the studio, getting real. It's going to be really fun, getting really real. We need to do that because, honestly, with the election around the corner, conflict escalating in the Middle East, hurricanes, everything, it's a lot. And we got to figure out how we can just manage all this wildness around us so we can stay sane, do our best work, and live our best lives.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And regardless of who wins, the whole country will need to heal some way or the other. So,
yeah, guaranteed.
And a fun fact that I forgot to mention in the intro also is that you actually testified in Congress and bringing civil discourse to Congress. So you're doing God's work.
Trying. Clearly they needed a refresher course, but I did 2 hours of testimony. It was wild. 2021. It was September 23rd, I think. Wild. Such a great experience. And really quick on this, Meredith, when people lose hope in our politicians, the group that I had the opportunity to testify in front of are real ones on both sides of the aisle. They are both like, this place is a friggin' dumpster fire. We need to fix it. And they brought in people to really give them solutions on how to do so. It was a smaller group of 12 lawmakers. So they have 435 people in the House of Representatives, I think. It's hard to get 12 people to move a larger body, but they were the ones who were serious about changing things and offering real solutions. So if you lose hope by looking at cable news, everyone's just a complete jerk, there's some people behind the scenes that are really doing that work to make this world a better place.
Oh, that gives me hope.
We need it.
We need it. We need it. And so to rewind it back for our listeners, I'd love to just start with what is your definition of civil unity and why has this work been so important to you personally?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Okay. Well,
just two of the lighter questions.
I know. Why not? Well, I'll start with the first one. So civil unity, first of all, civility, the way that I like to define it, it's simply an active demonstration of respect and the ability to disagree without disrespect. Oftentimes when people see civility, it's like, oh, just smile and turn the other cheek when someone's abusing you. It's all about being nice to people. I'm like, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about really deep level kindness, not niceness. And maybe I should kind of differentiate between the two real quick. Nice is just being polite and agreeable. Mm-hmm. And that's a super low bar, right? The worst human beings on earth can squeak out a please or a thank you.
Yeah.
Kindness is demonstrating through your action that you genuinely care about another human being.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right? It's hard for me to have a conversation with someone who I'm politically the opposite of and say, hey, listen, what you're saying right now, whether you know it or not, is very hurtful because of X, Y, and Z. Instead of just ignoring it and walking away. It's hard to give people feedback. You're a leadership coach. You know this.
Yeah.
The nicest cultures are the ones that fall the quickest because people avoid tough conversations. They don't do the work that's required to build bridges. Civility, as I call it, civil unity, is getting as many people as possible locked in to this new definition of civility so we can use it to change our lives, our world, and how we speak to each other.
Wow.
Yeah, we need to do it.
Yeah, and I love that distinction between niceness and kindness, and it's so true. It's like people are afraid of like rocking the boat or don't want to ruffle feathers or address like our own shame or our own, mistakes. And
Yep.
and kindness is actually about having the hard conversations and doing so while seeing the humanity in others and ourselves. And I love that distinction.
It's so important. You also asked the second part, which I almost skipped past. So why am I focused on this? Why do I want to do this? There's a longer story. I'll try to keep it tight. Gosh, my whole life, for whatever reason, I've been someone who's like a bullying target. I've usually been bullied for lots of different reasons, whether it was I grew up with a speech impediment, I was obviously a Black male. I I just was someone who was incredibly, exceedingly awkward, and I ended up getting to a lot of situations that weren't great for me. And I remember thinking to myself, like, God, I just wish people were nicer to each other. And before I understood the difference between nice and kind, like, why can people be kinder? Why can't people just be better to each other? Fast forward to about maybe a little over 20 years ago, I worked in a really toxic work environment, like super toxic. And these people treated me so poorly there. It's hard to describe how bad it was. And long story short, after working in this place for close to 18 months, I fell into a very deep depression. And I don't use that term euphemistically. Like I was sad. I wasn't sad. I was clinically depressed.
Right.
And make a long story short, one day while going to this job, I reached my limit and capacity for accepting unkindness. And I'm like, I'm done. And long story short, here in Los Angeles, driving down the 405 freeway, I decided I was going to take my own life. And what I did specifically is that I tried to drive my car off the overpass in an attempt to make it look like an accident. And my car hit the guardrail, came back in to incoming traffic, and I'm still here, obviously. But what that did for me is it set me on this really, really important path of like, what the hell is going on here? Like, why do people treat each other like this? And then I was like, am I the only one dealing with this? Am I the only one dealing with this unkindness? And I went down the rabbit hole. I was like, oh my God, like this is not just something I'm dealing with. Millions of Americans from all walks of life are dealing with this. And I just decided like, I got to do something about this. I don't, I don't feel like I have the qualifications maybe I do now, but at the time, just some random dude that just wanted to make the world a kinder place. And I just dove in and used my psychology background. It's like, how can we figure out really practical tools that we can use to get us back to a place of kindness? And that's been my work and will continue to be the work for the rest of my life.
Wow. What a like amazing thing that you've done to turn such a dark period into a beacon of, change and hope and other people who feel that way, knowing that there is like hope to pull ourselves out of it and to actually like literally be the change that we want to see. And that's like one of the biggest takeaways that I got from your book, which I was deeply affected by, of like, it's so easy to like feel all the hate and unkindness of others. And I feel like sometimes the hardest thing to do is to be like, even though it feels so deeply unfair, like we have to be the ones to take that first step.
It's the hardest thing because it's like, why can't she take the first step?
Yeah.
And it's like, I was in a session, I was doing a leadership talk or training, and there was one person in the audience who's like talking about her manager. It's like, I'll change when she changes. That's when I'll change. I was like, fam, what are you talking about? So you're telling me that you're going to give the power to be happy, to be in control of your life to her, your boss, who you can't stand? Why do we give our power away so freely? And why the hell do we give it away to people who we like and respect the least?
Yeah.
It's crazy. So I'm into this energy of keeping our agency and our autonomy. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that means that we do have to walk first. If we're going to wait for the most toxic, belligerent, hateful people to be like, you know what? Yeah, I'm feeling like being kind today. Let's go ahead and like hug it out. Like you're going to be waiting for a while. So I don't want to wait on that.
Yeah.
The world is I wrote this book as kind of like sounding the alarm. Like, we don't have the luxury of like waiting for the most toxic people in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our workplaces to figure it out.
Yeah.
We need to do this work and create an environment where those behaviors can no longer thrive. And it only starts when enough of us unify around this, thus the term civil unity,
Yeah.
to help create a world that we will be proud to leave to future generations long after we're gone.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of this quote, actually. Like, I went to the Hoffman process, if you're familiar.
I've heard, so this is the third time I've heard about this, so clearly I need to do this, but continue.
Okay, yeah, sign. I probably bring up Hoffman on every podcast, but it's all about looking at our past patterns, where we got them from each parent, knowing that, you know, each parent was doing the best they could with what they had, but then how do we choose to move forward as an adult in our own agency? And one of the huge posters they have when you walk in is, "It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility."
Yep.
And that just like hits home with this work. And maybe we can kind of go through an experiential arc of the book, because like, as I was telling you before, I've been deeply thinking about this, even in, you know, Venice Beach. Like, there's a lot of people that I was surprised to find out have very different viewpoints from me.
Yeah.
And it's been really hard to navigate. And one person who's very close to me in my life, like, we've had like a very big moment around like our differences politically, especially when you know, I had a life-saving procedure that women in other states with strict abortion bans who are experiencing miscarriages or abortions can't receive.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I feel really passionately about, you know, women's rights and what Harrison Waltz can do to restore those. I mean, obviously, also now our states need to do it too. But all of that's to say, getting sidetracked, like, one of the biggest takeaways I got from your, you know, the first part of your book is really like keeping our side of the street clean, and what can we do within ourselves. And maybe, yeah, if you can share some of those first few steps, because I was listening to it, and even though I feel like, I don't want to say I feel like I'm right, but I feel like my issue feels so like common sense, and there was certain things that I was doing that probably like heightened my emotional response to this other person.
There's so much there. So, you know, abortion rights is one of the most emotionally fraught arguments in our country today, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that in some large ways will probably play a key role in predicting the outcome of the election. I really do believe that. To the point that you just said. So when you're talking about abortion with someone who you deeply care about, and maybe this person is on the other side of the argument, let's just play along and say, one of the things that I love to talk about is this concept of setting ground rules. And it's so important when you have these conversations, because it can easily turn into attacks. So what I often mention is like, hey, look, so Meredith, before we dive into this topic of abortion, can we, because it can get off the rails pretty quickly, we know this. So can we agree to stay respectful, even if my opinion on the conference on that topic is different than yours? And let me say that again, because I totally botched that. I want it, because it's like, can we have a discussion about abortion? I know this is a really emotionally fraught topic. Is it cool that I can share my opinion on it, even if my opinion is different from yours? So what ends up happening by me doing this, I'm challenging you to stay respectful on a topic that you're very passionate about. And what I mention in this is like, I'm going to talk facts. So if I'm like, hey, look, so for me, this was a life-saving procedure that I needed to have. If I was in a different state, it could have been very scary for me, where doctors may have been afraid to give me the life-saving care that I need. This is why it's so important to me, because while I may live in a state where this is fine and legal, there are other women may not have that luxury. So that's why I fight for it. Now, the thing about civil conversations is that you don't have to change your mind. A lot of people think like you gotta like fold at the first sight of someone challenging you. You can have strong opinions, and I have very, very strong opinions. Politically, around abortion and other things. But what I can do is to be able to say it factually without attacking you. And just be like, hey, now, do you have something you want to share? Then you can share it as well. But when it's someone who you love, someone who you deeply care about, I think it's also important to share like, hey, not only do they have these facts around it, but here's how it affects me personally. This is why it matters to me so much. And I need you to understand why it matters to me so much. And to say that clearly. Because if you don't say that, and they may not understand, I love to say this, in the absence of a story, people create their own. So they have to just kind of discern on their own. Why is this so important to Meredith? Why is she getting so upset? But you have to explain to them why. Explain to them why it means so much to you. So they can better, hopefully empathize with what you're going through. But most importantly, maybe be able to see a little bit of the other side of the equation that they weren't able to see before.
Right. And I love what you say about like setting ground rules, because it's like, okay, let's both agree not to be, yeah, like off the guardrails here, and kind of slows down the conversation a little. And then I think the thing that I was struggling with, which is I guess a bit of a nuance, is like they're like, of course I of course I support women's rights, but I still think that the other candidate is better. And they're like, of course I support a woman's right to choose and a woman's right to health care, but I still would vote for the other candidate. And in my mind, I know we're really just getting into it, but I'm just curious, like how to like think about it. Because in my mind, I'm like, but those two things, I guess it would be kind of one of your open-ended questions of like, yeah, those two things feel contradictory to me.
Yeah, understood. And
I would
ask the question to this person, well, this candidate is more equipped to support women's rights. How do you know that? Mm-hmm. Like, just ask that question. How do you know that? Help me to understand why you came to that conclusion. I just want to understand more. Mm-hmm. And then the reality is a lot of people make their opinions based on what they see on cable news, what they see on social media. So I'm curious to see and kind of unpack how they came to that point. If like, well, hey, the 8 p.m. anchor on my favorite news cable station said so, well, then that's not really a good reason.
Yeah.
So what is it that would make you think that that candidate is better equipped to support women's rights than the other candidate? And it's worth asking, how do you know that? I want to create a world of critical thinkers.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea. I want people to go deeper than just this person who I follow, who has a ton of followers and a blue verified check mark, must be right. Like instead, I want you to be like, unpack this, have curiosity, be like, well, wait a second. I don't know if that's legit. I want to learn more about this and go deeper. Because when you go deeper, then you can find some answers. But I don't think most people do that.
Yeah.
I think they stay in their echo chambers. They keep getting the information that they want. They seek validation, not information. And as a result, they stay stuck. So that how do you know that question is a way for people to go a little bit deeper and to really see how valid and how deep they've gone in their own research about the topic. If they can't go deep, I just know, okay, well, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
How do you know? And don't just make up some weird dark web conspiracy theory from I want something that you can like show me that I can like, okay, that's really interesting. Yeah. But real stuff, so we can have real conversations. And that's how we get to kind of bridge the divide and get a little closer when things are separated.
Yeah. I love that, information over validation, or like put that on a bumper sticker. And so with that, like, I'm curious because I think something that I've noticed in that conversation and like here is that like there's certain podcasts that people are listening to, certain social media platforms people are getting their news from. And I guess I'll just say it, like a lot of, guys that I know. And I find it to be super right leaning and very biased. And, obviously they're getting inundated by it. Elon Musk endorsed Trump. Elon Musk is an idol for a lot of these guys. They listen to the All In podcast. I listened to an episode out of curiosity after the debate, and I found it extremely biased. These are these guys that they idolize. They're like billionaires and VC investors, and and it's hard because when I was having a discussion with this loved one, I found myself losing respect for them internally, and finding it really hard to respect them when I try to have a breadth of sources, challenge my own beliefs, talk to people of different backgrounds, but even just listening to like the reasons why they were supporting a candidate, I found it very hard to remain centered. And how do you navigate that when you find yourself internally being like, there's so much misinformation, or, obviously I'm not holier than thou and I need to continue to check myself as well. But when you're kind of like looking at where they're getting their sources, how do you lovingly, have a dialogue with that or bring awareness to that.
So it's funny because
I know this is like a healing, cathartic monologue.
No, I love it because this is real. This is real stuff. I would think, and the opportunity to speak to someone else who is right leaning and was like, I have a loved one who is getting her information from all these left leaning websites, and it was so funny because it was the literal, almost identical but opposite side of the equation, right? Yeah. So to the point, a lot of people on the right think that the people on the left are just wackadoodles and crazy. There's a lot of people on the left who are like these fascists, the crazy people who want to destroy democracy. I want to get back to your specific question though, because I think there's something here. So this loved one who spends a lot of their time looking at podcasts and these kind of bro energy things.
It's the crypto bros. Not to generalize everyone.
No, fair. We all know some of these guys. And it's like, so the challenge that I put in front of anyone who's in this situation, it's like, of course you got to determine how much you value this relationship, right? And I'm assuming that you do. So let's pretend this is something that you really do care about.
Yeah.
So knowing that you're likely not going to change this person's mind, that's a hard thing, right? Yeah. So that's probably the first thing. It's almost like going through Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. It's like, wait, but this person is smart and they understand things. And how can they not see this the way that I see this? That is fundamentally, I cannot wrap my mind around that.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of choices you have, right? So the one thing is that you engage this person in conversation and share, but you have to do this in a way where you're not trying to change the person's mind.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard place to be. So there's science behind this. It's called the boomerang effect. And it's based on the reactance theory from this guy named Jack Brem in 1966, not to nerd out too much. But the idea is that when you forcefully try to change someone's mind, what ends up happening is the actual opposite of that. They become more deeply entrenched in the beliefs that you hate.
I feel that.
Right? So It's not like they're like, oh, Meredith, you're so right. Why in the heck am I thinking about voting for this guy? Like, no, that's not going to happen, right? Yeah. So instead, it's more like, all right, well, I'm not going to attack you for it, but can we have a discussion about why I see it a little bit differently than you? Mm-hmm. Sure. And then you have to share your point. But the whole point is, the more you attack, the more, not saying you're attacking anyone, but the more you try to change your mind, like, how in the hell can you think this? Are you serious? Like, that person, women's rights, what? Like, then unfortunately you lose before you start. And it's hard. I mean, and that's why when I talk about the stages of grief, it kind of is, because you're seeing someone that you might not have seen in that way before. And then you have to find a way to get to a place of acceptance if you're willing to do that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you need to change your mind or your views. And quite frankly, when you see families divided over things that are political, and I want to say this thoughtfully, I think the political landscape now in 2024 is way different than it was like 10 years ago in 2014, right?
Right.
Back then, you could be a Republican, you could be a Democrat, and you could be like, hey, I'm voting for this. I'm voting for Romney. I'm voting for Obama.
I know. I miss Mitt Romney's presidential race.
Right. It's like, you're just fighting for issues, right? It's like, now it's like, this is way different than that. This is not like just fighting for issues anymore. So when people say like, I can't be around this person because this person believes in things that could cause me and people who look like me harm, right? So, Shola, how should I be civil to these people? And my thing is, if you do feel that you're in harm's way and you feel like this person does not respect you as a human being, there's no part of my book that says, well, you need to stay with them and lean into that. And if this person's a friend of yours, then you just need to just take it in and suck it up. Like, no. But it comes down to this individual decision around, can you navigate around what you're considering deal breakers? And deal breakers are only something that you individually can determine. Yeah. I can't determine that for you, right? There's some things like, hey, you do this and I can't be around someone who does that. If you believe in this or you support this, I need to explain to you why. Well, I don't give a damn. Okay, well then, but you do understand, like, that really hurts me and people who look like me. That could be really damaging. I don't give a damn. Well, then I should separate.
Right.
And I shouldn't be around someone who doesn't understand that. My thing and my argument in this book is that the deeply unreasonable people in this world are far smaller percentage than originally believed. Most people can be reasoned with. And while I will say that our goal is not to change people's minds, that doesn't mean that people's minds cannot be changed. And this is important, right? And the only thing that I'm saying is that when you forcefully try to change people's minds, I'll give you a metaphor. Let's say you love butterflies, right? And you want to catch a butterfly. Well, you're running around trying to catch this thing and it's flying all over the place. You can't grab it because they're so much faster than you. But what if you built a garden with beautiful flowers instead? Now you're attracting the butterflies to you instead of having to chase them. And they're now there and they're around you and they're present. The goal that I want to create is an environment of civility so it's more open for someone to be like, I can maybe see this differently now. Or I was giving this some reflection and you know what, this does make more sense. Versus trying to attack, which is the metaphorical way of chasing the butterfly.
Yeah.
You're creating an environment where someone can have that self-reflection without being forced to get to that point, which could surprise a lot of people in changing minds. I mean, the reality is in this book, there are people who are deeply so far off the rails. White nationalists, white supremacists, skinheads, super radicalized people that turn their lives around. And they weren't turned around because they were forced to turn their lives around, because someone actually helped them to get to a place where they showed them respect. They listened to them. Bad behavior is often an unskilled expression of an unmet need. So when I'm seeing people behave in ways that are just so off the wall, can I find a way to meet them where they are? What are your unmet needs that you're really struggling with? Because when we have these conversations and we're trying to, again, not forcefully change minds, but create the space where someone can realize on their own that maybe there's another way to see things. If their needs are not met, and their needs can be basic, right? The need to be respected, the need to be seen, the need to feel validated, the need to feel important. So oftentimes people go down paths that are maladaptive because they don't have their basic needs met. So if they have a conversation with you and they always feel like their needs are met and you're not constantly challenging them, making them feel stupid, you're a weirdo, you're this, you're that because you think this, which only then causes them to double down on their beliefs, right? Not only does it cause them to double down on their beliefs, that's only one thing. So they'll double down on their beliefs, on these beliefs that you find troublesome. Two, when you're attacking them, you destroy any possibility of them seeing the merits of your position.
Yeah.
There's like no chance, right? Because you just attack them. And three, you're only contributing to the toxic discourse that's destroying our country and our world right now. So if you're cool with all three, have at it. But the idea is most people aren't. So I'm challenging people, create this space where folks can have this conversation with civility, and maybe that need of being heard can at least be satiated, which could create the space for hopefully opinion expansion, thought expansion, and maybe even changing a mind or two.
Yeah, I love that so much because I think with my experience in taking radical ownership over what I could be doing differently, I was so disturbed by this person's belief that I like needed them to see it my way. I was sending them articles, TikToks. I even requested that they have a conversation with another person who I find to be a really eloquent speaker in, describing things logically. And I like needed them to like be like, you know what? Like these all have points. I've woken up from this
How'd that go?
slumber. It didn't go well. I mean, they did the things, but it almost felt like they were just going through the motions.
They were.
But still digging their heels in. So it was like a weird experience of like, okay, I'm giving them this stuff. They're looking at it. And then they're still not changing their mind, which made me even more worried and upset. And to make matters worse, I was doing what you say not to do in the first few chapters. And we can do like a nice little checkpoint halfway through the podcast for the listeners of like the first steps they can take. But I was also on TikTok finding solace in in the other people voting for Harrison Walz, being like, real men vote to protect their women, and like, all of the things that's like, if you say that if you vote for Trump, it doesn't mean that you're that you support rape. It just means that it's not a deal breaker. And I was like getting fed all of these things that like reaffirmed my anger and kind of probably like, what they are on the opposite side doing on X.
I was literally going to say that. So let's say, for example, let's twist this around. So someone who is hardcore in for Trump and Vance is like, Meredith, you just don't get it. Like, you don't understand. Like, these people want open borders. They want people running in. They're going to eat your cats and your dogs, and they're going to do all sorts of crazy things. How come you don't see this? What is wrong with you? Would you be like, and they're sending you articles. Like, yeah. I want to read these. I want to go through them and really see the merits of them. You'd be like, what the hell? I don't want this crap. I'm not reading that. So that's exactly what the person is doing when you're like, how can you not see this?
Yeah.
Those people, as strong as you believe for your cause, is exactly how strongly they believe for their cause. So if you're like, well, wait a second, like, I'm sending him this information that's valid and smart and thoughtful. Read it, just read it. And he's like, all right. So if the person did the same thing to you, would you be like, oh, I cannot wait to dive in? You're like, what the hell? You're already reading this. Like, you would go through the motions too.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge that we're at now. It's like, it almost is like we have to have a different strategy.
Yeah.
Because the whole, fire hose of information and be like, you need to really dive into this stuff and read it and have your mind change. See, you need to believe what I do. It never works. Yeah. There's not one person you've ever met, myself too, who's had their mind changed by someone sending them an article that they found online. Mm-hmm. So why do it? It just doesn't make any sense. And so my thing is like, maybe we should come from a different angle. What if we thought about being more intellectually humble?
Yeah.
What if we just we're like, maybe what I believe isn't completely right. Maybe my thoughts on this topic is not complete. Maybe there's more to this than what I originally thought. But if more people would be more willing to be intellectually humble and critically think, that would help us to get to a point where people are seeking facts, seeking information, seeing really wildly off the wall, completely debunked conspiracy theories. Like, okay, well, that's not true.
Yeah.
Or worse, like, I don't think that's true. I talked in the book how around one of the most common conspiracy theories, one of the ones that got really well publicized, was around 2020 when the Comet Pizzeria in Washington, D.C. had that Pizzagate situation where there was a talk that Hillary Clinton or whatever was running a child sex ring inside of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, this is a form of misinformation that went viral and people believed it. They believed that it was true. And worse, they did a Reuters Ipsos poll where something like 17% of Americans believe that was 100% true.
Yeah.
And I want to say 34% were like, I mean, I think it could probably be true, maybe. That means over half of people believe that not only was there a pedophile ring in some pizzeria, but that America is being controlled by Satan-worshiping pedophiles that want to do harm. 50%. Now, that's really scary, right?
Yeah.
But if we're not critically thinking, like, hold on a second. Like, that seems weird. That doesn't seem... Let me go deeper. That's all I want. Just to be like, wait a second. Why am I believing this? Because what we do is we believe stuff that aligns with our beliefs. Just because something aligns with our beliefs doesn't mean it's true. That's the reason why misinformation spreads so quickly online.
Yeah.
I see something that I want to believe about a candidate that I can't stand, and I'm like, yes, see, and I will share it quickly.
Yeah.
And like, only to find out that, ooh, that wasn't true.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people do. And I think we ought to be able to take a breath, take a beat, and just realize that changing minds is not a thing. I see people who waste their time. One of my buddies literally goes to one of the candidates' social media platforms and just wakes up first thing in the morning. He has this burner account, and all he does is just go and troll this person.
That's hilarious.
Like, literally, he's like, his whole thing is like, I cannot even have my morning bowel movement until I'm trolling this guy for at least an hour. I was like, But like, like, I mean, there's got to be a better time to use your time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like, how do we find a way to just, instead of doing that, can we just like get more people to lean into the concept of critical thinking, the idea that maybe we're not right about everything, and just diving a little deeper to getting more information instead of validation?
Yeah, and that's hilarious about your friend.
It's a true story.
I want to see what some of those trolling comments are, but it's. For sure. It's so funny because the two things I say that are so important in self-development work as a coach, the two qualities I tell people, it's like curiosity and compassion. And it's hilarious that, we keep getting doses of our own medicine. And I think that those have been like the two things tested the most for me in this situation with my loved one, of continuing to remain curious about why they're thinking that way, to remain curious and open, even though, I have like a bleeding heart around this particular issue and feel like this is so unfair. I'm the one who went through, that life-saving procedure. Like, how can they not, like, and now I have to be the one doing, manning the garden so the butterflies come. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. Well played with the metaphor. Nicely done.
Yeah. And so thank you. But it's like, that's the only way to do it. And yeah, so it's like the curiosity has really been tested. And I think, like, to your point about the social media and misinformation, it's like not inundating ourselves with it. And I know you had a portion of your book about that, of like not flooding ourselves with things that reinforce our beliefs that then only make us more angry. It's like, I already know my viewpoint, so why do I need to spend 20 minutes on TikTok reaffirming that?
Yes.
And getting even more angry about why this other person doesn't think that way. It's like, that's not keeping my energy like clear or in a state of equanimity for when I do talk with them.
That's fair, but you also demonstrated that people seek validation deeply.
Totally.
So when you're having this conversation with your loved one who sees it differently, what we need to do then, almost part of like our survival mechanism, is to be surrounded by people who see the world the way we do.
Yeah, because it feels like less alone when I see those people. It's like healing.
You get me. Thank you. Right? And I get it. That's the reason why people watch cable news.
Yeah.
How many people go from like, oh, I want to get all the viewpoints. I'm going to spend 30 minutes on MSNBC, 30 minutes on Fox News, and maybe some on CNN, and just get a kind of just a real well-rounded view.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Yeah.
They go to where they can get their ideas validated. It's a beautiful feeling to know that there's all these smart people who believe the things that you believe.
Yeah.
So we seek that. We want that. We crave that. But what we do is we create a world at the expense of creating civility, common ground, and finding a way to be able to coexist with these people. Listen, of course, people would love the idea to live in a world where everyone thinks the way that we do. But unfortunately, they're in your doctor's offices, they're in your workplaces, they are police officers, they're in your own families. In some cases, you're even sharing a bed with these people.
Yeah.
You got to figure this out. And so we have to. And it doesn't mean, and this is one thing that kind of bugs a little bit for me, is this weird idea that it means, just, what are you saying? We just got to like roll over then and not fight for what we believe. Who in the hell said that?
Yeah.
I mean, I have very strong political beliefs. I'm not rolling over for anybody.
Yeah.
But what I'm doing is like, can we learn how to disagree better? We're so bad at disagreeing. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to call you all these names, and then I'm going to find a way to separate myself from you so we can no longer, I see you as like the Antichrist. But what if I see you as someone who has different views?
Yeah.
And that's how it is. That's how the world that we're going to live in. The idea that we need to agree on everything before engaging in civil conversation with them is an exercise in immaturity and futility.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. And unfortunately, as you can look around, go to your social media commentary, you'll find that people are really bad at this.
Yeah.
We have to do better if we want to save our world.
Yeah. Amen.
Right?
Yes.
I find it's such a good challenge, because some people, like my buddy who's like goes on to the trolling one of the candidates, it's like fueling yourself with cotton candy for energy, right? It's like it's like
empty junk food.
Totally.
It's like little dopamine hits.
Yeah. It's like, so like, that guy, he didn't have a comeback to what I said. I win. What? What does that even mean? Like, it's like, I instead, I'm like, how can we find a way? Because I've had I'll give you a perfect example.
Yeah.
You might find this is kind of relevant to what's going on with you and your loved one. So I had someone who had very differing views around in 2020 around what happened during the summer of 2020 in the Black Lives Matter movement, et cetera. And I talked very vociferously in support of Black Lives Matter, and still do to this day. And this person was very against that. Well, you think all lives matter. And I was like,
oh my gosh.
Oh, right. No one said that, but all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. Like right now they don't, as you can see. Like, so
how can all lives matter?
How can all lives matter? It doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. Like if I went to the doctor's office and I broke my arm and I'm like, oh my God, this hurts so bad. And then, can you fix my arm? Doctor's like, well, all bones matter. I was like, no kidding, doc. I know that, but right now it's my arm. That's really me. I don't care about my femur or my toe or my skull. It's my arm that needs attention.
Yeah.
And so I explained to this guy who's like, well, I feel like this Black Lives Matter thing is like, all this is victimization from Black people. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I was like, all right. So I'm finding myself getting visibly angry because this is really like touching me, right? I'm feeling like I can't tell you how many times I've, because of the color of my skin, had to deal with some really uncomfortable situations, putting it super mildly.
Yeah.
So I shared with them just a story that actually helped them to kind of understand a little bit. I was like, so one of my neighbors, he's a white guy, very important, very close friend of mine. And I told the story to the guy I was arguing with. He was on vacation, my friend. And he's like, hey, Shola, I have a ton of Amazon boxes piling outside my front door. Do you mind, we're on vacation right now, do you mind running over to my house and grabbing those packages and bringing them back to your house, and then I'll pick them up from you when I get back from vacation? And I was like, hell no. There's no way I'm going to a house that is not mine, picking up packages that do not belong to me and then bringing them back to my house. Do you not see how that could play out poorly for me?
Yeah.
And my friend was like, oh man, I get it. And I shared it with this guy. And it was crazy. He had like a light bulb moment. I said, look, man, all I'm saying, so you're talking about white privilege. I'm not privileged. I work hard for what I got. Like, my guy, no one's saying that. What I'm saying, white privilege doesn't mean that your life hasn't been hard. It just means that the color of your skin isn't contributing to your life difficulties. And for some reason, that was like, oh. But if I attacked him, if I called him a racist, if I called him all these stupid names, to be clear, there are plenty of people who deserve that title. Yeah. But I'm just saying, if I did that, then unfortunately, I don't create that ground where I could share something with him that opened his eyes.
Right, you would get defensive or something.
Right, 4 years later, this guy's like, oh my God, man, I'm still thinking about that story you shared. Really woke me up, and I am really starting to see the world differently. I don't know if that would have happened if I attacked him.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping for, is like just creating the space where the possibility of civility is there. This is not about politeness for politeness sake. Who's got time for that? I'm talking about how do we find a way to create space where people can actually maybe look within, see a broader world around them, and possibly do the inner work that they need to possibly change some minds.
Yeah, that's such a perfect story for sharing your experience without labeling him anything, and without from the surface or whatever making him feel judged or whatever, but just okay, let me share my experience with you and do with this story what you will.
Exactly.
And then he got to have his own process around it. And yeah, I think this is a perfect time to kind of do a few tactical points that what would you suggest to the listener as the first few steps for themselves, kind of cleaning up their side of the street, if you will, ahead of or going into having a conversation with someone around a deeply triggering topic?
Yeah. So some of the stuff we've talked about, so I'll just lightly touch on, I'll go deeper in some other things. So one of which is the ability to, and I can't say this enough, the critical thinking aspect is so important. We have to be willing to be open, curious. You use the words curious and compassionate, right? And we'll circle back on this, Meredith. I'm curious about, with your loved one, which one was harder for you, the curiosity aspect or the compassion aspect. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
But we do need to get to a point where we are open, curious, and willing to listen with an open mind. If we're not willing to do that, then we're probably going to die before we even get started with this whole finding common ground thing. One thing I want to go deeper on is the part of the book that people say is the most important aspect of the book. It's doing the inner work before you do this. I cannot say enough, man, because people want to go in here and like, yo, let's create a more civil world. Let's go. Yeah. And then before you know it, they burn out because if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not doing what I call in the book, tough love self-care, right? It's not going to the spa, reading a nice book, or any of that type of stuff. It's like doing the hard shit. Excuse my language. Am I around the cursing?
Yeah, of course.
Apologies. All right.
It's powerful stuff.
All right.
You get powerful words.
Good Lord. I know, Mr. Civility, but yeah, I really do curse a lot. But anyway, the idea, it's the real hard stuff that people avoid doing because it's not pleasant and it's not fun, but it allows you to have the capacity to be kinder and more civil. I'll give you some examples. One of which is creating firm boundaries.
Yeah.
What I find is that people who really want to engage in this work often lean more towards the nice side and not the kind side. The kind side is like, I'm gonna have boundaries. I'm gonna lock in here. I gotta make sure that I'm saying no to things that are going to deplete my capacity to have energy to give to others and to myself in the hopes of creating a more civil world. I often say this about people who struggle with boundaries, and saying no is such a powerful thing. The only people who will be upset with you enforcing your boundaries are the people who benefited from you not having any boundaries in the first place.
Wow. So well said.
It's true.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you see this all the time. So it's like people who are have no boundaries. As an adult, you can't get through this world if you don't have boundaries. You should be able to say no to people and be like, you know what? No, I'm not going to pick up your kid in the middle of the night from the airport on a Tuesday. No, I'm not going to help you move. No, I'm not going to be your shoulder to cry on when you're dumping drama on me every single day. When we don't have boundaries, it's really, really hard, or very, very easy to get burned out, and really hard for you to get to a place where you can create a more civil world. So that's one example. I always say, there's so many, removing yourself from toxic relationships. Toxic relationships are really hard to define. It's kind of like, I couldn't tell you the things that make a toxic relationship, but you know when you're in one.
Yeah.
When you're in and this doesn't have to be romantic. It could be a friend. It could be a family member. It could be a parent, right? And sometimes what I'm telling people is if you want to be kind to others, you got to do that inner work of starting to separate yourself from people who are going to drain your energy from you.
Yeah.
You just have to. You have to. And I love to say this. Some people in your life need to be loved from a distance, man. Real talk. And that's a hard thing for people to really wrap their mind around, is that. Another thing is really limiting your time on cable news and social media.
Yeah.
It's
Guilty.
I know. But here's the thing. So,
especially the last few months. Guilty.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wild to think that on average, the average American spends 224 hours a year on social media. 224 hours a year.
Wow.
On social media. And if you think about that, that's insane, right?
Yeah.
If you think about this, I'll just ask you honestly, when you're stressed out and the world is like so just got you down, do you think like, would your first stop to go be reaffirmed on the goodness of humanity, become de-stressed and become happier? Would your first stop to go to your social media feed?
Like, I want to say no. Yeah, I would like want to be in nature, meditating, doing breath work. Yeah,
all that good stuff. Yet that's the first thing we do. We grab our phone, start swiping, and all this does is build that cortisol up. It helps us to lose faith in our fellow humans, and it's also breeding ground for some of the most antisocial behaviors on earth: body shaming, bullying, stalking, racism, all sorts of stuff, tribalism. So I challenge people that really want to do this work. It's not that you can't be on social media. I mean, I'm not some curmudgeon who hates technology. I love technology. But you have to manage it instead of it managing you. We have to be the ones in charge of this, so we have the capacity to do this work. That's a bigger topic. Yeah. And I think probably the third thing, I challenge people to fiercely see if they can find common ground.
Yeah.
It's something that you can find it if you look hard enough.
Right.
I mean, you got to lock in into your conversations like you're diffusing a bomb. Like you got to be so locked in and be like, all right, because a couple of things that reasonable people agree on, right? We should have freedom, especially in America, right?
Right.
We're the land of the free. So I would like to believe that we should have what I'd like to say agreeing on freedom. Freedom to live your best life. Freedom to love who you choose to love. Pray how you choose to pray. Live how you choose to, as long as it's not harming you or anyone else. Freedom should be a general agreed upon thing. But there are unreasonable people out there, right? And so there's a saying that I love. Honeybees do not waste a moment of their time trying to convince houseflies that honey tastes better than shit. And it's true, right? Honeybees are too busy doing work with people who are reasonable, thoughtful. The houseflies who are so deeply unreasonable don't believe in freedom. Mm-hmm. Should we be wasting our time with these people? And my argument is no. But my argument is also that those people are a far smaller percentage of society than we tend to believe is true.
Yeah.
So if we can get to that place where we can find common ground with someone who may vote differently from you, like, you know what? Think about gun violence, right? A lot of people are like, which is, I personally, not a gun fan.
Same.
Not a fan.
For the record.
Yeah, not a huge fan.
Yeah.
But being able to have a conversation with someone who's a responsible gun owner, mm-hmm. I'm down. I mean, listen, I'm not trying to take anyone's guns away. I don't personally like guns. That's not my thing. I don't get it.
Yeah.
But we both, and one of my friends who is an avid gun owner, is like, look, I'm a responsible gun owner. I love my guns. I'm always going to have my guns. But I was like, man, I struggle with guns because why should we have weapons of war? Like just in people's like garages. That's crazy to me. And he's like, look, but we can agree. And we had this conversation. Like, we can agree that like freedom matters to both of us, right? So let's talk about what we can do to make it so people we have more responsible gun owners out there if they choose to be. We both found common ground on that. He gets to keep his guns. I don't have to keep guns. I'm not going to take guns from him. We both agree that we should have some sort of regulation to make sure that it's safer for people to own guns who should have them. That's common ground.
Yeah.
There's no chance in my life that I'm going to own a gun.
Yeah.
Ever. But there's no chance also that I would do anything to take my friend's gun from him because that matters to him.
Yeah.
He wants his guns. But we found that common ground even though we are diametrically opposed on the issue of guns. It's possible. We have to look for common ground and fight for it. And if we do, we can really get there. But we have to look for it.
The common ground thing is so huge. And it just reminds me of this little side story. So I'm like, speaking of social media and TikTok, I do more creative liberties on my TikTok than on my Instagram. And I made this one video that's like, that I'm looking for a man in finance.
Oh, yes, I've seen that video.
Yeah.
My daughters were playing it. I was like, what is that?
Yeah. So it was a viral moment this summer. And I just had this funny idea to make one where it's like, I'm looking for a man who knows women's rights are human rights. Liberties stands up for me. Women's rights, human rights. Liberties stands up for me. And I'm like, this is so fun. And I posted it getting ready for all the blue hearts on TikTok. And it ended up on the wrong side of TikTok.
Oh, no.
Or for me. And everyone's like, you need a Trump man. And like, oh, well, then if real men vote for Trump and then started saying stuff about, abortion and babies. And usually I would just like delete or leave these comments. I did engage with one or two of them. And I I was like partway reading your book, part through, and just as an experiment, one of the guys who's like, how dare women murder unborn babies? And I'm like, well, women's rights, it's, I think we can also agree that a woman shouldn't be forced to give birth to the child of her rapist. I'm like, you seem like someone who cares about life, and that you would, surely we can both agree that women should be protected from their rapists. And he's like, yeah, no, like anyone who rapes a woman should get capital punishment. And so it's like it was just like such a funny moment of like me like being like trying to find his humanity on the comments, which I don't recommend people like,
I mean, good luck with that.
Play these games. Found it. But I found it, and it was like win. So that was a win. In the end, I decided to protect my peace, and I was just like, I can turn off the comments, and I like turned them off. So I was like, wow, It's all gone.
Funny how that works. But a couple of things on this. So it's funny because I feel like I had a conversation with someone around this. Like, I feel like this civility thing takes like humor away. Like, we can't make fun of people and stuff. I'm like, I feel like there's always an opportunity to like have lighthearted humor. Like what you did with that, like playing on the man in finance with a man who like, supports me and cares about women's rights. Like, it's fun. You're just having fun, right?
Yeah.
It's not attacking anyone. And I feel like I do think we all need to chill. It's like, I just think there's a little bit of that energy. Like, can we just have some fun? I mean, if we're not hurting anybody, you're not hurting ourselves, like, what the heck? But I feel like what you did in that comment section, which is a very hard place to find common ground, because listen, behind the anonymity of a phone screen or a computer screen, it's very easy to be a keyboard gangster. And like, you know what? I can do whatever I want. And that's my mama always says, it is hard to hate people from close up. Mm-hmm. So when you're having a conversation like you and I are having, I'm not going to come at you with that type of energy. First of all, I love you, so it's not going to happen anyway, but just play along. If I were to attack you, I'm not going to be like, it would be weird for me to do that because we're right here.
Yeah.
But it's also easier to find common ground when we're closer. When you have the screen as that huge divide between another person, finding common ground on social media is not really the best place. It's kind of a powder keg for some of the worst behaviors in humanity. Mm-hmm. That's why it's like, if you're really trying to find it, that's probably the worst place to go. You can, if that's what you choose to do. I mean, you have a platform, I have a platform, people running my platform saying all sorts of wild stuff.
Yeah.
And to protect my peace, sometimes I decide if I want to engage or not. Some people just straight up DNE, do not engage. I'm like, no, I'm not going to get into that. I want to have a fight with you. I just want to just run my community and just have some fun. But there are times when I feel like it's worthy of my time, my energy, and my effort. But that depends on a number of things. Yeah. It depends on what I'm feeling, my energy for the moment, and how important this relationship is to me. And in some cases, setting an example for my community of what I want to see as a way to handle these type of situations.
Yeah.
A lot of things that go into consideration of this.
Yeah, it's so true. And it was a cool moment when that happened. And then as like more and more other comments kept flooding in, I'm like, I'm not going to delete all of these. Like, this is meant to be a fun video. If I turn off the comments, only people who are going to engage with it are the ones who are going to like it. And I just posted it for fun. And I probably will in the coming weeks, like in my own way, share, my personal connection to women's rights, but a more serious, like personal story on Instagram, I think.
Are you going to do that?
I think so.
Can I ask what's your pause in doing it, besides it being very personal, which is obviously good enough reason right there? Is it the main reason of like, because I'm assuming a lot of people don't know about this. Would they be hearing it for the first time on Instagram?
I think people would be hearing it for the first time. And it's, like phrasing it, more so about the life-saving procedure I had, a DNC.
Yep.
Than whether it's an abortion or a miscarriage, because the fact is it's all women's rights.
Exactly.
And so the pause is that, I'm a coach, and I have people, all types of people who follow me, as I'm sure you do. Mm-hmm. And it is a lot of my content is like lighthearted, mm-hmm. and or like how to. So it's definitely going to feel like a departure from that for a moment. But I felt that, again, it probably won't change people's vote, but my hope is that some of these guys in Venice that I've been like around, and other people just like have a little bit more of a human face to this story. Like, that I think that it's not a black and white issue. And I think they don't realize that in Texas, like the maternal mortality rates have increased 56% under its strict abortion ban. And 26,000 women have been forced to give birth to the child of their rapist. And so my hope is to at least bring more nuance, but I am a little bit afraid of sharing it. But I feel also compelled to, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense.
Yeah.
When I decided to share my suicide attempt was huge. I was really worried about what people were going to say. I was known as this Mr. Positivity guy, bringing all this energy, and I really never broached those topics around mental health challenges, my own and others, and how it led me to a really, really dark moment in my life. I was afraid that And a lot of the fears that I had looking back on it, it's like 10 years ago, I was so afraid that people weren't going to take me seriously. Because at the time I had a full-time job. I was like, shoot, what if these people decide that they don't want to promote me, or I can't become a leader because they don't think that I'm unhinged, not able to do this work. And all these fears are totally made up. The world responded when they're like, man, thank you for sharing that. You're not alone. I would say percentage-wise, I'd say probably 93% of people after I told my suicide story were like, man, thank you for sharing that. The 7% were like, ooh, weird, overshare. What's wrong with you? Oh my God. Like, that's so weird. Like, no one wants to hear that, man. Just go back to telling your funny jokes around whatever. Those people aren't my fam.
Yeah.
And I realize I'm not speaking to that 7%. That's not my audience.
Yeah.
In fact, if I say that I can get them to leave, that's awesome. Make more space for people who do get it. But my thing is that when we have something on our heart that needs to be shared that could deeply affect the lives of others, and we choose not to do that out of fear, we are literally making the world a worse place by our inaction.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm sure it's like what you were saying with the 7% of people who didn't get it. Like, not only are they not your fam, but it's like the lives that you impacted by sharing it far outweigh like a few people having their own ruffled feathers for whatever reason.
Seriously. I mean, when I talk about mental health, I'm generalizing quite a bit, but this is just my personal experience as a Black man in America. I found that not a lot of Black men are willing to have those conversations, but they are more willing after they see someone who looks like them, AKA me, have this conversation, have this discussion. They're like, oh, whoa. So wait, if that brother can do it, I can talk about this. And that's what I'm hoping for. Like, a lot of times, one of my buddies, Black guy, we were talking about this the other day. He's like, man, when I was struggling with my mental health issues, not my mom, but this guy's mom was like, man, my mom, go take a nap. Go take a nap. You'll be fine. And I was like, Mom, you don't get it. That's not how this works. We're talking about depression, anxiety.
Yeah.
So once I got up there and started talking about that, it opened up the door for him and others to then seek their own mental health help. That's the whole point. So that's 7%. Why would I worry about them when I unlocked someone, hopefully put them on their own mental health journey to get the help that they need, and then hopefully do some really meaningful work at removing the stigma that's so common in our society around getting mental health assistance so we can hopefully change the world and make it more civil in the process.
Yeah, that's so real. It's like the stigma and like the fear of talking about it, but it's so like, yeah, it makes people feel so much less alone, and it's actually way more common when we're able to bring it to light. And I think that that's just the thing with like my story with my DNC is like, yeah, I hope that, women are afraid to share their experience with abortion and with miscarriage for whatever reason, and it's deeply personal.
Yep.
And then you have people on the internet calling you like all sorts of names, and it's scary. And my hope is that by sharing it, like, people will have a little bit more of a nuanced and humanized perspective of what's at stake for us in this particular issue. There's so many other issues that are at stake for people. It's like I can only talk about one and one caption.
Exactly.
But yeah, that even if it doesn't change their vote, that hopefully they have a little bit more empathy and understanding for like the real fear a lot of us are facing around the continued loss of our rights.
Yeah.
And what can be done there. So watch this space.
Exactly.
It's coming. It's already been through like 8 drafts. So I'm just
when do you think it'll be ready? Like, what do you think ready looks like?
Well, the current question, which I guess by the time the podcast is released, we'll have the answer. It's like, I think I'll either release it at the end of this week and follow it up with our podcast, or put our podcast out like Monday and drop it like Tuesday.
That works.
So it's like one is going to warm up the other, and I'm just like deciding which.
But the fact is, you're doing it.
I'm doing it. Yeah, I feel like I can't go through this election and not say something. Like, I had the ping, and I actually shared it with one of my parents and or my mom, and she was like really scared. She's believes the same things I do, but she was like, please don't share that. Like she was very scared for me and my safety.
But once you know where that's coming from, right?
Yeah, and I know it's coming from a place of love, and I've since kind of really made it as palatable as possible and tried to remove a lot of like my emotional words around it, and more just like, this is what happened, this is what's not possible in those states, like here's what's at stake, and yeah, kind of kept additional commentary out.
It'll be interesting. I'm so curious to see how that goes.
Yeah,
when you
knock on wood.
Well, you know what, that was funny because this is something that matters to you.
Yeah.
And this is a very deeply personal lived experience that you went through. And there's value in sharing that, because there could be someone out there who's experiencing something similar, or maybe again someone's eyes could be opened to a situation that they may not have been previously privy to because of what you shared. That's why we have to do this work. If you decide to start shouting down and shaming people with your story instead of just sharing the value of what happened to you, you're going to lose people who may want to learn or listen and be like, whoa. Especially people who know you, like, oh, Meredith is cool. I had no idea. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And maybe I would have thought differently. It's kind of like the whole Black Lives Matter story that I shared with a friend of mine. It was like the situation I shared earlier in the podcast. He's like, I might be against Black Lives Matter, but Shola's cool, which gave me the opening to be like, well, then, hey, I want you to think about something that you may not have thought of before. And then we had this discussion and he opened his eyes and his mind. You're in the same position with your platform to people who do know you or have followed and consumed your content over the past few years, feeling a kinship with you. You then decide to share this.
Yeah.
And they may be like, whoa, I had no idea. They could be on the other end of the abortion argument, but see how it affected a real human who they care about and have their mind open just a little bit more than they would have if you didn't share it.
Right. And just to consider, like, I'm sure you guys, you follow me, so I'm sure we care about each other's lives. And I'm saying in a different state, my life, who knows what would have happened. And
you might not be here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality, the real talk that we need to understand and unpack. You may not be here.
Yeah.
You may not have been here if you didn't have that life-saving procedure.
Yeah. And it's crazy. It's kind of like with sometimes people with the news, like, yeah, there's so much that I want to get to in the last 30 minutes. It's crazy. But I'm like, we need a part 2 after the election.
Hey, I'm right down the street from you, so that's not an issue. We can make this happen anytime.
Okay, great. But yeah, I think that the crazy thing is that it's just like, getting people to understand that silence is a privilege. And I think it's like that Desmond Tutu quote, like, if you had stayed silent during times of injustice, then you're taking the side of the oppressor. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are like, oh, I'm inundated with the news. It's so like annoying and sad, and like there's nothing I can do, and people feel like hopeless, or like you said in your book, like the shrug squad.
Yeah, the shrug squad, yeah.
Of people who don't really feel like there's anything that they can do. And I feel like sharing more of these stories just like humanizes it, and it's like, hopefully if it at least affects someone that then you'll be more inclined to like care or think a little bit differently. And yeah.
Well, it's super cool that you're going to share this story and then hopefully open someone's mind. It's also super sad that it takes you to have to know someone to be like, oh, now I'm going to take it seriously. You know what I mean? It's like, I think one of the most reductive ways to go through life is like, hey, if it's not a problem for me, then it's not a problem. And then it's like, well, wait a second, but I'm not a woman and this affects me. I mean, I care about what's going on with you.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't need to know you, and you shouldn't have to be my friend for me to care about you. I think that's the one thing that I wish we would get past. It's like, oh, it doesn't affect my inner family, then who cares? Oh, but I know, or like this, I forgot the celebrity and it's drawing a blank, but there's a guy who was known to be very anti-LGBTQ. Come to find out that his son or daughter, I really do not remember, ended up being or was all along LGBTQ, part of the LGBTQ community. And the celebrity was like, oh, well, in that case, I'm a huge supporter. It's like, wait, so you weren't before, but now that your kid is part of the community, now you care? Why does it have to be in a situation where I want to get us past that? That's like the baseline ground level
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, I know someone who's affected by this. I'm going to care. I want people to care regardless if you know anyone like that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I do not personally know anyone in the Middle East, but my heart is breaking for those people who are over there. And I should care about what's going on over there, even if I'm not there myself. And that's what I think we need to get to, is that level of, hopefully, as we kind of go up this like civility pyramid, like past the baseline level of just like only caring about stuff that affects you. And then you care about things that affect you and your loved ones, and then people in your neighborhood. But what about like the world?
Yeah. And just like, because otherwise, what's the point of our life if we're just living for ourselves? That's such an empty existence. And
Awful.
and it's like, you can look at the people who are, like you were saying, radicalized, are usually deeply, deeply unhappy.
Deeply.
Because you don't have that sense of purpose and like actual tangible community outside of the community of like hate or wherever you find it online. There's like two side tangents I want to go down. I know we only have 30 minutes. So I want to do these and then also talk about how we can deal with misinformation, microaggressions, and the logical fallacies.
Oh my God.
Boom, boom, boom. I know. I'm like, I just want to get through it all.
Let's do it.
Okay, but like two quick things. Number one, with the Middle East stuff. So I find this, I'm curious like how you would approach it from a civil unity perspective. So like, I just want peace in the Middle East. Like I myself am ethnically Jewish and obviously feel very deeply scared for the rise of anti-Semitism around the world. At the same time, like my heart breaks for Palestine and like what's going on there, and I don't know enough about the situation to like in the complexities of it. But there's like atrocities and lives being lost on both sides, and I feel very scared to like comment or say anything because I have people on my feed on both opposite ends of the spectrum, and then them viewing probably my silence as me not caring, but it's me being so afraid of like saying or doing the wrong thing in that situation, where I just truly, my heart breaks for humanity in that situation of like, my heart breaks for the Palestinians, and my heart breaks for Jews around the world who are feeling afraid of the rise of anti-Semitism, who've been persecuted many times over in various contexts in history.
Yeah, I would agree. There's so much with that
I know. I'm like, I want to get through everything.
No, but this is an important topic because it is causing a lot of division, and understandably so, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the conflict in the Middle East has been going on for quite a bit of time, and probably won't be solved anytime soon, unfortunately. I will say this though, is like, I lean towards, I'm pro humanity.
Same.
I don't want to see people dying and suffering and being burned alive in hospitals or being taken as hostages and raped and tortured. Like, no one should be down with any of this.
Absolutely.
And so if my thing is, I just want it to stop and I want to get to a place of peace. Well, I mean, and I don't really care if that seems like super Pollyanna-ish. Anything that's causing violence and harm to our fellow human beings is absolutely unacceptable. And what's happening right now is beyond the pale. And we have to figure out a way to get to a place where we can see the abject insanity and inhumanity of what's going on and take some steps to do it. And you're absolutely right. We see this on college campuses where there's a lot of rise in anti-Semitism, and a lot of my Jewish friends feel very uncomfortable going to college and going to classes for fear of being attacked or labeled, whatever they may be. And there's a lot of Palestinian friends that are horrified as they watch their loved ones just fighting just to get some food to eat and just survive for the next day, and worry about getting bombed and killed and seeing their loved ones die. So when people are like, well, what side are you on? I'm like, man, like I said, I'm side of humanity. I want this to stop.
Yeah.
And I think that the only way that we're going to get to a place where we can have discussions around this that are so emotionally fraught is we have to be really open to talk about the pain that's being felt on both sides, without attacking that other person. I should be able to talk to you and share with you my pain, what I'm feeling, and why I'm hurting so deeply because of this, and allow you the space to do the same.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this idea of just shouting others down, labeling them, it's not only does it not work, it's never worked.
Yeah.
So if we've been doing the same thing for so long, shouldn't we try something else? Something else.
Mm-hmm.
So just taking the time to sit and talk to someone, and maybe we'll walk away and we'll disagree about it, but maybe after our conversation's over, you're going to have an opportunity to walk and be like, maybe think as you're going to bed at night, like, oh man, I'm thinking about what Shola said. That hit. I understand where he's coming from more than it ever would if I chose to yell, attack, and shout you down.
Yeah. I love that, like holding space for each other's pain, and not, the goal isn't about, making sure your side wins. It's about, do I feel understood? Do they feel understood?
Yes.
And if we both feel understood, like that's what we're going for.
Amen.
More than like changing each other's mind. It's such a complex topic, and I'm right there with you of just like wanting to see like peace and humanity, and it's really, really hard because I care deeply for friends who are hurting so much on both sides, and people on both sides affected by the atrocities that both sides have had to endure, and like finding just the common humanity and desire for peace.
It's so unfortunate that, like, kind of going back to the whole common ground thing. I mean, I could be wrong, but I would assume that most reasonable people want peace.
Yeah.
So the more people we can get on board with a potential solution and think about these things creatively, the closer we're going to get to getting there. There's so many seemingly unsolvable issues in our country, in our world's history, that have been solved. And there's no solving what happened in the Middle East. It's easy to fall into that. God knows I did and have. And like, I don't know when this is going to be solved. But you could say the same for the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that brought in so much money to the U.S. economy. And the idea that they're going to stop that and see the humanity of these men, women, and children that they brought over from West Africa was like, screw that. We're making a lot of money. There's no way we're stopping this. And there are people, thank God, who believed that no, not only is this inhumane, well, let's just stop there. It's inhumane.
Yeah.
We have to stop this. And they took this institution that made so much money and stopped it. So now, obviously, afterward, it morphed into other awful things.
Right.
But the idea is something that seemed impossible to stop came to an end. So I do believe that someone said, will there be peace in the Middle East? I think, yeah, there will be. But it's going to require a lot of people to lean into the idea of actively fighting for that solution.
Right. Like you were saying in the book about the, reconciliation after the genocide in Rwanda.
Yeah.
Amongst the...
How the hell did that happen?
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you think about that, the violence that took place in Rwanda over the 100 days. If people who gave up their own family members for slaughter, neighbors turning on neighbors, and finding a way for Tutsis and Hutus to live peacefully side by side after this, I mean, can we not find a way to live on the same street with someone who's voting different than us in the November election? I mean, it's possible. That's the thing. Like, that was life or death.
Yeah.
Literally. That's not figurative. Like, literal life and death in Rwanda, and they figured it out. So was it a completely perfect solution? Of course not. But they figured it out as well as they could. That's what reminds me, when I can't seem like reconciliation's a thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, if they can do it, we can figure this out here. We have to be able to figure this out here. But it's going to require us to use uncommon solutions that we haven't used up to this point.
Yeah.
We have to.
I completely agree. And so, yeah, to like recap the steps, it sounds like, of our own stuff. It's like the boundaries. It's keeping our own boundaries, protecting our energy, protecting our mental space.
Yes.
Not over consuming social media, doing what we can to regulate our nervous system. Like you said, in the book, owning where we're noticing we're having our own emotional response to something and like doing what we need internally to process that so we don't, project or have a reaction onto somebody.
That's a big one, Meredith. I'm glad you mentioned that because it's a huge one.
Yeah.
You got to know what triggers you.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know what triggers you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I notice it. And I notice like in my situation with my loved one, like the things that I could have done better. It's not inundated myself with social media, reaffirming my viewpoint when I'm worried about the news that they're consuming, reaffirming theirs. And I could have, been a little bit less, or I could have less sent them so many things needing to change their mind. And then the third thing, I could have been less emotional toward them because part of it was outrage. Like, how could you see me having gone through this thing and still like believe this? Like, what does that say about you? Like,
did you say that?
I didn't say it like that, but I was just like, how could you basically like see me going through this and still say abortion isn't a priority issue for you?
Can I ask, if you don't mind me unpacking since we're here again?
Yeah.
Does this make you angry?
Yeah, it does. For sure. I feel like, enraged sometimes when I think about it.
Does he know that you're enraged?
Yes.
How did he respond to your rage?
What an interesting question. So I think I don't want to say like indifference, but maybe more of a protective mechanism for himself.
Okay.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of just like kind of, whoa, like that, like this isn't that big of a deal. We just have these differences, or like kind of downplaying it, I would say.
Did that make you angrier?
Yeah, for sure.
How did you get past that?
So I guess like the initial repair was just allowing me to speak for like 2 hours, expressing my sadness and how I felt and my rage around the situation and just like listening. And then they did write like a Steelman article or Steelman letter, Steelman, where you write the letter like to yourself from the other person's perspective.
Yeah, it's very hard to do.
Yeah, he did that to himself from me about why I was like deeply troubled. So those like at least were starting points in making me feel understood.
Could you do that if you were asked to do that for the other side?
I mean, I could probably, it would take, it would take a little bit of effort, but I could probably, I could probably do it. Like I did try to listen to, why they view the things the way that they do. And I could have probably even listened better. But I could probably do it. I think I could.
I love how you said that, because I was like, yeah, I could. I think I could. Yeah, sure, I could.
I think I can.
It's hard, man. That's why this stuff. Listen, if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. There'd be no need for me to write this book, because the people are like, oh yeah, we can disagree and not have anger, and that's why I'm so curious. That's why I had to ask. Thank you for humoring my questions, because I just want people to who are listening to this to understand, like, this is real stuff. This isn't like, oh, you're going to read this book and you're no longer get angry at people for believing what they believe. Like, I get angry all the time. Part of what I did in my book was be really clear on what my triggers are.
Yeah.
And one of many triggers that I have are people who deny the existence of intolerances like anti-Semitism or racism or misogyny or Islamophobia or homophobia, and believe those things don't exist. And I find myself, when someone says to me like, oh, racism's not a thing anymore. And I find that to be really hard for me, because I get really, really challenged. I was like, well, wait a second. Like, why was I accused last week when I was in a department store and I was walking with my hands in my pocket that someone came up and said I stole something? Like, did that happen? Has that happened to you before? And that's not like a first time thing.
Yeah.
It's a common occurrence. So that to me infuriates me when someone doesn't have the lived experience and they share something like that. Then I'm like, ooh, oh, it's on and cracking. Let's go. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, and I got to settle myself. That's why I talk around. If you want to really create a more civil world, if you don't know what your triggers are, then you're so easily hijacked. So since I'm clear about what those are,
Yeah.
I can like, oh, he hit that spot. Ooh, I gotta check myself and do the work that I need to reclaim my mental wellness before I go off. And
Right.
that's part of the work that needs to be done. That's honestly, I don't think most people do. And that's why I had to put it and outline it in clear detail what to do in the book.
Yeah, and it's so true because it's like in that moment, it's so easy to go into like, this happened to me. It's not your lived experience.
Yeah.
Like, this is so deeply personal. But it's like we still kind of like going back to that quote of it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. It's like we still,
Yeah.
if we want to have a productive conversation with them, we do have to be the one self-soothing before we respond to them, because it's not going to help our cause to respond emotionally to them.
No,
It's
it
going to
won't.
make them like overwhelmed or defensive, especially if they haven't been, going to therapy or
Yeah.
unpacking
Oh, yeah.
their own emotions. Then it's like a whole other, patterns responding to patterns.
Yeah. And it could unfortunately escalate into a dangerous situation depending on what's happening or where it is. If you're at a bar, at a sporting event, at some random place where someone does something that triggers you or says something that trigger you, and you're like going to be combative with them, it can be really dangerous.
Yeah.
So it's not just around creating a more civil world. It's also your own safety and
Yeah.
well-being that you have to take into account. So yeah, I'm big on that as well.
Okay, so for the last 20 minutes, I feel like it'll be power packed. Because what time is it? 11:40.
Yeah,
Oh my God, it's flown by. I'm
I
like, we still
know.
have another hour at least. But for the last 20 minutes, I would love to just do a few kind of like rapid fire things around like how to address like, logical fallacies and misinformation, and then kind of wrapping up with like, what are those, tactical steps to really like complete, the civil unity discourse. And then we'll end the last few minutes with a little meditation.
Oh, I'm here for the meditation. Let's
Yeah,
go.
let's go.
Let's go.
I'm like, we all earned it if you guys have stuck with us this long, and we hope you have. Like, we're all gonna have such a nourishing, unifying meditation on the other side. Just you wait.
Yes, hang in there. It's coming.
Yeah, watch this space
You
again.
watch this space. Which one do you want to dive into first?
I guess like, yeah, let's do the logical fallacy and then maybe misinformation, and then we can kind of tie it up with,
Microaggressions? Or do you
yeah,
wanna mention that?
microaggressions.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like all three.
Let's-
Maybe like what each three is, and like what a good kind of like, starter question and response is for those, and then we'll take it home with like what the full arc of process is.
Sure. So logical fallacies are just a way that people can manipulate conversations in a way that can be done intentionally and disingenuously, unfortunately, sometimes. It's like if you were to be like, for example, let's just say, God forbid, America gets into a war of some sort. And you're like, I'm against the war. I think the war is terrible. Wow, so you hate America. Is that what it is? You hate our troops and you hate America. That is a logical fallacy, right?
Right.
All you're saying is that you're against the war. And then what I just did is now throw something else on top of you that you did not say.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes when you're having these conversations, people will either exaggerate, distort, completely change, leave out key information that allows them to create an argument that misrepresents what you're saying, which makes it easier for them to attack.
Yep.
And so in the book, there's a whole list of tons of them. If we had more time, we'd go into all of them,
Yeah.
but you can jet out the book when you can. But one thing that you can use to help combat that is a model that I created called the HIT model, HIT. So the first thing is ask that question that I said before. So when someone says something or makes a statement that's kind of outlandish, that maybe is distorting your argument, how do you know that? That's the H. How do you know that? You're going to put it on them to share how they came to this particular decision, opinion, thought. You're not letting them off the hook because it's an open-ended question that's going to allow them to go a little bit deeper. The second part of HIT is the I. It is, and I think this is the one thing that I feel is one of the most important parts of this. You have to identify the logical fallacy. So there's so many. I'm going to use a good example because I think there's a really good one in the book that I personally love. When I was writing this and I was going through the logical fallacies, it's like, which one do I want to spend the most time on? Because there's so many in here that I feel could be, for lack of a better way of putting it, real. Let me use one.
Yeah.
So on here, probably one of my all-time favorites is the ad hominem fallacy.
Yeah.
Which we see often, right? When people are, and by the way, by definition, ad hominem is a Latin phrase that means against the man, right? So person A says, we really need to improve the culture of our workplace. I'd like to share some suggestions on how to do this. Person B is like, wait a minute. Haven't you been divorced twice? Why would we listen to your suggestions when you've repeatedly proven that you can't improve the culture in your own home? Like what this does is it's causing us to focus on the person versus the argument. And I think that's a really common thing that we see, unfortunately. So all I want is with this all these different lists of logical fallacies, identifying, hey, what you just said is an ad hominem attack. You're not actually focusing on the argument. You're focusing on me. The idea is that we do need to improve the culture of this workplace. So can we talk about that instead of talking about my 2 marriages? Like finding a way to do that. But all of the logical fallacies that are in here are clear. So when I say the I for identify your argument, you've got to study the 10 or 11 that are in there, learn them, see when they come up in arguments and be prepared to deal with them. So there's that. T is to test their argument. So the way to test their argument is to, one, how do you know that? Hopefully you get a good example. Then you're going to identify their logical fallacy if they're using one and explain to them that that's what they're doing, and then test their argument by asking a question. Well, wait a second. So you said that the earth is flat. How do you know that? Well, then they give you an answer. Well, what you said is an example of fallacy X, whatever fallacy it is. Then you're going to test their argument. So help me to understand this. So you're saying that the earth is flat. You said that you learned this from someone on social media who has a big following. Their following isn't based on, or their expertise is not based on the field that has to do with flat earth at all. So can you help me to understand why you believe this is true? And you're going deeper than just the idea of going, oh, okay, well, I'll take your word for it. How do you know? Identify the fallacy and tell me why this is a valid source of information. Go deeper. You want to put people in a position. Now, I want to be super clear about this process.
Yeah.
This is for people that you can have good faith arguments with.
Right.
Not everyone you can.
Right, but people who are open to the discussion.
Yeah, if they're open to discussion, sure. But it also kind of leads into probably the more challenging stuff around misinformation and disinformation.
Right, because after maybe you test their theory, and that's a perfect segue into the misinformation. So we go through the hit that what was it?
How do you know that's the first question?
How do you know that? Identify the fallacy.
Yes, and then test their argument.
Okay, so now we've done that, and then let's say the argument is backed up with like sources that are misinformation. Yeah, so one of the things that I talk about often with misinformation and how we can combat it is the whole idea around being critically thinking, as I said earlier, but I want to go deeper than that. So when you see information online, there is something that everyone can do, 2 things that you can do that's really, really practical. One is super obvious, but very few people do it. Cross-reference and verify. So if I see something that like I'm reading online that really is like, oh my gosh, like it really aligns with my beliefs and I want to believe that is true, I need to verify. Like, for example, if a political candidate who I do not like was just accused of doing something off the wall, like something crazy, and I'm just like, ooh, see, I knew this person would do this, and I post it online. My job is to pause, take a beat, and verify. Go to trusted news sources. If they're not covering it, and you see this in some random person's social media feed, chances are it's not true. Because a lot of stories are meant to do 2 things: get you on outrage overload or anxiety overload. If you're feeling that, then you have to pause. I'm like, this is a warning sign that this may not be true. Right. And so I need to verify this and check. So that's one thing you can do. Second thing with misinformation and disinformation is what's called lateral reading. And I love this. Researchers out of Stanford University did this. And they took 3 groups of people. They took PhD professors at Stanford. They took Stanford undergrads. And they took a group of professional fact checkers, right? And they had them observe 2 groups. And it's funny because I'm not going to get into the details of the study to bore anyone. But long story short,
In fact, I won't even get into the study. I'm going to get into the actual what you need to do, what the conclusion of the study is.
Yeah.
They realized that they had this group of PhDs and undergrads and fact checkers look to see the validity of some of these two separate groups, two separate organizations. One group was way more credible than the other group. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
The PhD historians and the undergrads got it largely wrong, but the professional fact checkers were completely right about which group is more credible to talk about this particular topic. So they found out, what did the professional fact checkers do? They read laterally. What this means, most people read vertically. When you see an article, you read the article and you're done. And then you make a judgment. Reading laterally means you're going to look at the article and then you're going to laterally leave the article and go to other places, do Google searches on the author, read the about page, the resources of the website.
Verify a stat.
Verify the stat. Go check out their social media presence. See how legit they are.
Yep.
And they found that, oh, wow, after doing that, like, these people are actually really not credible to be talking about this stuff at all. And that's how we need to go through our lives. When we see stuff online, don't just stay within the article or the post. Is it more work to do this? Yeah, that's why so few people do it.
Yeah.
But it's a way to really combat misinformation before it spreads. And I think I can't say this enough. Even if it aligns with our beliefs, it doesn't mean that it's true.
Yeah.
And we have to stop and be like, ooh, I want to believe this because I can't stand this person, but maybe it's not true.
Let me slow the conversation down.
It's hard. It's way harder than just leaning into just our own worst impulses and just wanting to just, again, seek that validation instead of really seeking true information.
And I love what you said in the book, too, is if you do post something that's misinformation and you find out later that it's misinformation, not to just delete it, pretend like it never happened, but actually to post like, I shared this thing earlier and it actually isn't true. And I want to acknowledge that because I think that that's so important, and it helps, you know, because misinformation spreads so quickly, it helps us do our part in like owning, you know, that wasn't correct and I shared it too quickly.
I love, it's so funny. I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure was included in the book, because a lot of people
are embarrassed when it happens.
Yeah, because listen, we've all been there.
We've all been there.
We've all been like, oh, we're so politically involved or whatever it is. And then someone does something. And one of the best examples I saw of this was on LinkedIn. This guy who I follow, who is one of my favorite follows on their really solid voice in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, posted something that someone did supposedly that was deeply, deeply racist and anti-Semitic. It was awful. And he posted it only to find out like, hey, so that story has been debunked. That's not true. And multiple people in the comments like, hey, oh man, that's not true. You should not be spreading this. He does a separate post and say, hey, listen, I have a previous post that I'm keeping up, but I also want you to see like that is not true. What I shared was wrong. Many people brought this to my attention. I'm very sorry for any damage that this caused. I'm very passionate about this topic, about this, and I allowed that to cloud my better judgment. However, what was on here did not actually happen. And it's been proven false, and I apologize. He got so much respect from that. Man, that was a masterclass in what to do. And I was like, how many people actually do that?
I know. And it's so funny because it actually makes us respect the person more.
Of course.
I call it like, turning our shame into our superpower.
Yes, it is. Because a lot of people don't want to do that. Like, oh, I'm going to be seen as weak or dumb or whatever. And it was the complete opposite. He was getting rained with flowers. People were like, man, thank you for doing this. Thank you for setting an example of what we need to do when we share misinformation. Part of the thing that's so tough for me is like, because I talk about civility. And when I wrote this book, I find myself in a situation where I had to fact check like everything 1,000 times, because the last thing I want to do is talk about fact checking and then not fact check my own stuff. It's hard, and that's part of the reason why when I talk about my book, I want to be really thoughtful around it, because this book was so deeply researched that I don't want to just like throw stuff off the top of my head. Like I want to go through this and make sure like, let me get that quote right. Let me make sure I get this particular logical fallacy right, because there's so much in here that I want this to be like a guidebook, a reference book. I want this to be a book that they have in like high schools.
I mean, everyone should read it. I'm like, I wish that it should be required reading for everyone in
Man,
America
it
right
was the
now.
hardest thing, honestly, Meredith. 19 months writing this thing.
Wow.
And I walked away from writing this book 4 times. Now, I want to be clear. When I was saying walking away, like, all right, I'm done for the day. Like, I'm done. I'm not writing this. I do not have what it takes to write this thing. I cannot see this to the end. I can't do it. And when I walked away, I'm done. The longest time I walked away was 3.5 months.
Wow.
Like, I can't do it. I just don't have what it takes. I'm not the person who can bring this into the world because I just don't have the ability, the skills, and I can't, because something would happen in the world like, oh crap, I didn't include that. That's what I wrote in chapter 2 is totally contradicts what I wrote in chapter 7. Which one is it? I got to make a call. All these different things.
Yeah.
It was very, very hard.
Well, it's so perfect, like that it came out when it did, and that you finished it when it did, because it's like, yeah, like I said, it was so medicine and cathartic for me reading it.
Thank you.
And just like owning, yeah, like I do. And it's funny because every 6 months I'll read Marianne Williamson's book, A Return to Love.
Oh yeah.
And
do you have a Course in Miracles too?
I do. I haven't followed it as religiously as I've followed her kind of condensed summary.
Yeah, Return
of
to Love is like an all-time classic. Yeah.
And it's like that's the message I keep getting with this book of like returning to love, focusing on what I can control, like even with this. And now we're kind of going off the guardrails again, but even if I never leave a loop unclosed, but even if, with this person, like I can't change their mind, I can donate to the Harris Balls campaign. I can have these kind of discussions. I can, donate to like women's rights organizations. I can paint my nails blue in solidarity for the blue wave. And so it's like, what are the positive things that I can do that'll make me feel better versus just getting angrier and angrier about someone not seeing it my way.
Let me ask you though, because I'm always curious if this particular person decided to be like, all right, well, I mean, I'm going to roll in with my Make America Great Again hat, and I'm going to, when we go out to dinner, if you're going to paint your nails blue, I'm going to wear my MAGA hat.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's a great question. I think that that would be extremely hard for me. And I think that might be a boundary. Like for me, yeah, it's hard because it's like, yeah, I'm doing that on the blue side. And I guess it's like the things that I can control in terms of like how I can contribute to the cause if I feel like I believe in it. It would be very hard for me based on my perceptions of what I feel like MAGA stands for.
Mm-hmm.
And I continue to hold myself accountable to having conversations with people because there are people in my life who are undoubtedly going to vote for Trump. And I want to have a conversation that focuses on our humanity and trying to understand and our common ground. And so that's a tough question.
and it was meant to be tough because I mean I think that's the world that we're in now, right?
Yeah.
It's like, how do we find a way to bridge gaps, bridge divides with people who may not see the world in the way that we do?
Yeah.
And it's one thing if it's some random stranger that you happen to bump into, like, when you're shopping in the mall or something, but when it's a loved one, that's a different ball game. It becomes really hard, and it causes us to have to look within and what we truly value, what we consider to be acceptable or not, and what bridge we're willing to create as we hopefully bring this divide a little bit closer. It's way harder than it sounds. And that's why this work is around doing that hard work and leaning into it and knowing when we're not willing to do it.
How do you address someone who you feel like has been consuming misinformation? What are some questions that you could ask them to just kind of bring curiosity to like where they're getting their sources?
Yeah, and maybe
without judgment.
Yeah, well, maybe that's the first part, right? Is ask them where do you get your sources from? Why do you believe that this source is credible? And I think the more open-ended questions we can have versus, is the source credible? Yeah, then the conversation's over. Why do you think this source is credible? Tell me more about where you found this from. And, one example, there's so many different examples. There's so many different things going on in the world that you pull different things of misinformation out there. But you want to have that conversation with someone and just ask them, where do you get the source from?
Mm-hmm.
And also going back to the original thing around the ground rules, it's like, hey, so I see this differently. Can we have this conversation remain civil if I do share some information that may run counter to what you just presented? See what they do. Because if they're not willing to do that, don't engage.
Right. It's not a worthwhile
It's not. Because
conversation.
the only way that we get to reduce unproductive conflict is reduce our time spending that we spend in it. Like, we should not be working and having this awful, constantly contentious conflict that's getting us nowhere, unproductive, and it's not going to come to any reasonable solution or resolution. So let's not do it. So if I say, hey, listen, I want to disagree with you on this. Is that cool? Like, what do you mean? You're telling me that you don't believe this? No, we're not going to disagree. There's nothing to disagree on. You're crazy. Then we need to walk away from the conversation knowing that there's no resolution that can be found.
Right. And letting that be okay. Being like, I've tried. I remained open-ended, curious, tried to not project any judgment. And if they're not going to engage or answer that question, then then it's not a productive conversation, and we can water the garden elsewhere. Yeah. The other butterflies will come.
The other ones will come. And that's the whole thing. I mean, this guy or this person is not interested in finding that solution, then we can't waste our time doing this.
Right. 1,000%. Okay. And then one last little rapid fire kind of, how people can respond to like microaggressions, and maybe like just a quick definition of what microaggressions are. And then I love your car example that you use in the book, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah. So microaggression really is a smaller, relatively speaking, form of bias that can be done either intentionally or unintentionally that really seems to affect marginalized groups specifically. So I'll give you a really quick example. I was at a speaking event at a large Midwestern college. You've heard of it before. I'll spare them with the anonymity. And I was in a car after my talk going to the airport. And it was super hot in this particular Midwestern town. I'm like, man, I just want to get to the airport. And I'm like, hey, sir, do you mind turning on turning up the air conditioning? He's like, oh, yeah, sure. We're talking about the NBA. It's like, it was really, really cool. And then he's like, hey, man, you mind if I ask you a question? I was like, sure. What's your question? I knew it was not going to be anything good. He's like, why can't all black folks be as polite as you?
Yikes.
Oh, Dios mío. I'm like, my guy. So I could have attacked him.
Right.
But instead, what I did is I asked this question that I use all the time when people say ignorant stuff to me. I was like, what do you mean by that? This question's so good because it takes the stress off of me. Now, you gave me this awful gift box that I don't want. So I'm like, nah, fam, I don't want this. You take it, open it, tell me what's inside, right? Gosh. So now he's like, what do you mean by that? Well, wait a second. You just said that most black people aren't polite. I'm super curious. Surely you're smart enough to know there's polite and impolite people of all races, correct? Oh, yes, I know. And I should have been smart about that. I used this when someone said to me, hey, Shola, the only reason why you got promoted in your previous job is that you don't act black.
Oh, my gosh.
So again, what do you mean by that? And listen, if I got to be uncomfortable, guess what? You do too. Now we get to be uncomfortable together, and you made this happen. So now we're going to sit in this together, and I want you to be as uncomfortable as you just made me with your stupid question. But I think that if I just jump in and attack this person, there's no chance for learning.
Right.
But when I give them that question that you have to now self-reflect on and own what you said, there's a possibility that we can turn this around.
Right. That question is so gold because it's like you're taking interest in what they said. You're being curious. You're not making any assumptions about their character. You're simply just turning it back on them. And you said, having them open the box and you're like, our common ground is the discomfort right here.
Yeah, that's what we're having. Now we have this common feeling of discomfort that we both get to wade through.
Oh my gosh.
And you put us here. So good luck getting out.
Yeah. I think like some of the greatest things that I got from your book is like having those curious questions to other people, and like curious and open-ended questions, and like doing our own, like we said, emotional processing on ourselves to not, bring our own reactive responses into it, however like justified we might feel.
Yeah.
And yeah, to continue to kind of use these open-ended questions to understand like where their needs or their pains are coming from, to show that we like care about understanding them even if we don't agree with them. And I feel like that's the only path forward.
It is.
Okay, so we'll do a little medi, and then I would love like closing remarks and your hope for civil unity.
Woo!
and where people can find you. But the moment we've all been working toward a little meditation. So if everyone wants to just go ahead and get comfortable. We all earned it. So taking a deep breath in, holding at the top, and exhale, letting it out, letting out the whole feeling of whatever thoughts or emotions have been running through you this episode. Taking another deep breath in, breathing in the hope, the possibility, the space that it's starting to create inside of you, and exhaling that out, letting that soften you, relaxing your muscles, relaxing your jaw, relaxing your hips, relaxing your feet. And third and deepest breath in, breathing in that extra space, that curiosity, and exhale, letting that breath wash over you like a waterfall as you keep your gaze inward and just starting to bring awareness into your heart space. Noticing how your heart feels after this episode, these conversations, these, desire and hope to have healing around some of our most divisive issues, and just breathing into whatever your heart might be feeling, just simply allowing it, breathing with compassion, internally letting yourself know that you're okay, that you're safe to process this feeling, that whatever coming up is valid, and internally you have the tools, you have the love to be able to sit with it. And imagining someone else, maybe someone that you've had one of these charged conversations with, or you feel it, their views are different than yours. Imagining them in your heart space, maybe feeling that same hurt or divisiveness in their heart, whether they're aware of it or not. Just looking at them and feeling what that might be like for both of you to be experiencing this at the same time. And as you breathe and look at them with this, almost seeing them morph into their inner child, that younger version, that 6-year-old version of themselves who might be scared or lost or confused. And as you see them as their younger self, who might just, be trying to be loved or trying to be understood. Thinking back, reflecting that feeling back to yourself of, how you might, your inner child is trying to be loved and feel understood. And as you look at them, having this shared feeling of this desire of love or longing for being understood or belonging, and just breathing acceptance into that shared common ground, that shared desire for whatever these feelings might be, and for that inner child existing in both of you, who's just trying to figure it out, even if it's in a way that you don't agree with or feel is misguided. And then placing one hand on your heart and breathing into the love in your heart, and extend one hand out and imagine from that hand shooting out love from your heart to their heart, unconditionally, without need to get it back, without need for them to change, but just sending them this love, this possibility for a new way. And just imagine that even by sending it to them, regardless of what they do with it, just it being in their atmosphere, imagine it softening them, allowing more space, more possibility. As you see and feel it soften them, breathing into your heart space even more, feeling more of that possibility in you. Imagining a wave of possibility, of these little ripples of love in the air around you and them, touching your friends and family, touching their friends and family, touching the friends and family of them, of their friends and family, touching the friends and family of their friends and family, until it creates this ripple of this air infused with love around the entire world. And then breathing that feeling of that unity into your heart, that knowing of inner possibility, knowing that it can all start from this point right within you. Taking a deep breath in. Exhale, letting it wash over your body once more, awakening every cell in your being to this possibility. And then another breath in. And exhale, bringing it into the present moment as we open our eyes and come back into this space. Wow.
I feel like I'm in a different world. I'm a meditator. But there's something about having this interview and this time together and then going into a meditation afterward that almost put me in a really different state. It was very powerful.
Oh my gosh.
You have a like super great like calm app like meditation voice though. You know that.
Wow. Well, thank you.
Oh, like, there's no way I'm the
Oh my
first person to tell you that. There's no way. Like if there's like apps like audition to be on the Calm app or Headspace, like they should be like using this for like your demo reel. Like it was that good.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for receiving that.
So good.
Thank you. So to take us home, can you just share a few quick kind of like reflection questions for the listener that they can take with them into, a potentially challenging conversation, and yeah, what your hopes are for them and for us at large.
Yeah, gosh, there's so
I always
much.
end with like 2 or 3 questions.
No, I love it. One of the things that I would love for people to walk away with is just I'm going to challenge you to be kinder than you feel comfortable. Like I'm looking into the camera. I'm like hardcore. Do it. I want you to be kinder than you feel comfortable. I mean, be a kindness extremist. And this means like the nice stuff around please and thank you, all lovely. But the willingness to share space with someone who you may not see ideologically with, the willingness to search for common ground when you don't feel that any exists, the willingness to stand up in solidarity against things like misinformation and disinformation and not just like wash it over you and not think that you're immune from doing it yourself. Have that willingness to self-reflect and do that hard work of critical thinking and engaging in the intellectual humility where you may look at what you believe and question your own beliefs, which is hard to do. And maybe most importantly, do that inner work where you're going to set up those boundaries. You're going to make sure that you're removing yourself from toxic relationships, doing the hard stuff, like maybe divesting yourself from 3 hours of primetime cable news programming. I know we're in election season, and sure, you can watch on election night, but do you need to watch 3 hours every night up until then? Social media, pulling back a little bit so you're not being overwhelmed with this energy that could possibly be messing with your mental health and your well-being. This is the hard stuff. And quite frankly, the stuff that I'm talking about is just the beginning. In the book, Civil Unity is the harder stuff, the real work around the practicality of creating a more civil world. But it starts with your willingness to be kinder to others and to yourself than you were before listening to this keynote, calling it a keynote. We're in like keynote speaker mode in this interview so you can put this into action and really make this practical in your lives for yourself, for your loved ones, and for the world.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. And just yes, retweet to everything that you just said. And I think for myself, having kind of worked through my personal example with you, what I'll commit to is continuing to, do the inner work on myself. So I go into the conversations with this person from a very clear head, allowing them to fully express their viewpoint and ask some of these more open-ended questions, and just sit through it without kind of having my counter argument or incredulousness baked into whatever I hear.
Yep.
And trying to have a conversation like that and hearing their viewpoint where I try to find that common ground. Yeah. And that's what I'm going to commit to.
You can do it. I mean, but first of all, you're highly emotionally intelligent, Meredith. So that's the deal. Like you already have that. This stuff is so hard, but that's why so few people do it. We need people who are emotionally intelligent to start leading the way first. So I need you.
Thank you. Well, and I'm grateful, honestly. I'm grateful that that thing happened and it led me to having this interview. And it truly, because it was something that I felt, but it really woke me up when someone close to me, who I know loves me, was feeling that way, that it did make me want to write that post. It did make me have this conversation. So it's all happening for a reason, because it made me realize how important it is and to not take it for granted, because we can live in our own echo chambers. And when I had that conversation with that person, then it was revealed to me so many other guys in Venice actually feel this way, that I was like, wow, like, you know, we actually do need to be having these discussions and not just glossing it over or making assumptions.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's all happening for us. We look forward to the part 2 on the other side of the election, healing. And where can everybody find you and in your book?
It's so easy. Just go to sholarichards.com, SHOLA Richards.com. All my socials are there. Book is there. All the stuff is there. Just go there. It's the easiest place.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Shola. Like I said, I feel like everyone needs this book. If you listen to the episode, like, I can't recommend actually reading the book enough. Like, there's so many examples we didn't even get to on the pod. And thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Meredith.
And I'm wishing everyone productive, powerful conversations. Definitely reach out. Let me know how it went. And I will see you next week for more powerful stuff.
Let's go.
Woo!